call at 3:05 a.m. Part 1: The House at the End of the Road. My name is John, and until recently I believed that some places were simply unlucky. I don't believe that anymore. I live in the United Kingdom with my girlfriend Emily. A few years ago we decided to leave the noise and pressure of the city behind and move somewhere quieter. We wanted a small house, a peaceful neighborhood, and enough distance from everything to feel like we could finally breathe. That was how we found the house at the end of a narrow country road. It was old but beautiful. Tall trees surrounded the property on almost every side, their branches hanging over the roof like enormous fingers. Beyond the stone walls were open fields that disappeared into thick morning fog. There were no busy roads nearby, no neighbors constantly coming and going, and barely any sound except birds and the occasional wind. The rent was strangely cheap. At the time we thought we'd been lucky. Looking back I realize we should have asked why. The first week passed without anything unusual happening. We unpacked boxes, explored the nearby village, and slowly made the house feel like our own. Emily loved the kitchen. I liked the small upstairs bedroom overlooking the fields. Every evening we'd sit together and talk about how peaceful our new life felt. Then 7 days after we moved in, everything changed. It happened at exactly 3:05 in the morning. I woke suddenly. The bedroom was completely dark. For a few seconds I didn't know what had woken me. Then I noticed the vibration coming from the bedside table. My phone was ringing. I reached for it and looked at the screen. Unknown number. There was no name attached to it. I stared at the number for several seconds. Something about seeing that call at that exact hour made me uncomfortable. Still I answered. Hello. Nothing. At first I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard breathing. Very quiet breathing. Someone was on the other end. Hello, I said again. The breathing suddenly stopped. A moment later an old man's voice whispered my name. John. I froze. The voice sounded distant and strangely close at the same time, as though the speaker were somewhere far away and standing beside my bed. Who is this? Silence. Then the voice spoke again. Don't let her answer. The call ended. I remained completely still. My heart was pounding. I looked at Emily. She was sleeping peacefully beside me. I checked the number again. Nothing about it looked familiar. I convinced myself it had to be a prank. Maybe someone had found my number online. Maybe someone in the village was playing a stupid joke. I turned the phone face down and tried to sleep. I couldn't. The next morning I told Emily what had happened. She laughed. Maybe they have the wrong number. At 3 in the morning. She shrugged. People are strange. I smiled. True. We laughed about it and moved on. At least we tried. The following night I was awake at 3:05. I had been expecting the call. Sure enough, my phone began vibrating. The same number. I didn't answer. After several rings the call stopped. I relaxed. Then it rang again. I ignored it. 30 seconds later a message appeared. Answer me. I stared at the screen. Another message arrived. She can hear it. I looked at Emily. Her eyes opened. John. Yeah. Who's calling you? My stomach tightened. You heard the phone. She nodded. Of course I heard it. I looked down at my phone. Then Emily said something that made the room suddenly feel colder. John, that's not your phone. I stared at her. What? She pointed toward the bedside table. My phone was sitting there. Silent. The ringing continued. But it wasn't coming from my phone. Ring. 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 The sound was coming from inside the wall. Neither of us moved. The ringing continued for several seconds before suddenly stopping. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I called our landlord. His name was Mr. Harris. He arrived around noon. He was an elderly man who had lived in the area most of his life. When I explained what had happened, his expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. You heard a telephone ringing inside the wall. Yes. He looked at Emily. Both of you. Yes. Mr. Harris stared at the bedroom wall. Then he asked quietly, "Which wall?" I pointed. He walked over and placed his palm against it. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he stepped away. "You should sleep somewhere else tonight." I frowned. "Why?" He didn't answer. Mr. Harris. He finally looked at me. "Because that room has been empty for 23 years. I laughed nervously. "That's impossible. We sleep there every night." "I don't mean the bedroom." He pointed toward the wall. "I mean what's behind it." Emily stepped closer. "What's behind the wall?" Mr. Harris hesitated. Then he said, "An old telephone room." He explained that the house had once belonged to a retired telephone engineer named Arthur Bell. Arthur had disappeared in 2003. Nobody knew exactly what had happened to him. During renovations, workers had discovered a small hidden room behind the bedroom wall. Inside were old telephone wires and equipment. Most of it had been removed. But one telephone line had been left behind. I asked why. Mr. Harris looked uncomfortable. "Because nobody could disconnect it." "Why?" "Because it wasn't connected to anything." I stared at him. "Then how could it ring?" He didn't answer. That night Emily and I slept downstairs. At 3:05 a.m. my phone rang. I looked at the screen. The number was different. This time it was our own home number. I answered. "Hello." The old man's voice returned. "John." I didn't speak. "You're sleeping in the wrong room." The call ended. Then we heard something upstairs. 3 knocks. Knock. 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 Emily grabbed my arm. "Don't go upstairs." I wasn't going to. Then footsteps began moving across the floor above us. Slowly. One step. Then another. Then another. The footsteps reached the stairs. We heard them descending. Emily whispered my name. "John." I stared toward the staircase. Nobody was there. Yet the footsteps continued. They reached the bottom, then stopped. The house became completely silent. My phone rang again. 3:06 a.m. Only 1 minute had passed. I answered. This time the old man's voice said, "You shouldn't have moved here. Who are you?" There was a pause. Then, "I'm Arthur." My blood went cold. Arthur Bell. Silence. Then, "Yes." I swallowed. "You're dead." The voice replied, "Not yet." The call ended. The next morning, Emily and I went to the local library. We searched through old newspapers and local records. After almost an hour, we found an article dated 2003. The headline read, "Local telephone engineer missing." The man's name was Arthur Bell. He had disappeared from the house on October 14, 2003. There had been no sign of a struggle. His car remained in the driveway. His wallet was still inside. His keys were on the kitchen table. But Arthur himself had vanished. Emily continued searching. Then she suddenly stopped. "John." "What?" "Look at this." She had found an old photograph. It showed Arthur standing outside the house. Behind him was the upstairs bedroom window. But someone else appeared in the photograph. A woman. She stood behind Arthur. Her face was blurred, but her shape was unmistakable. "Who is she?" I asked. We searched the article. Nothing. Then Emily found another newspaper. This one was much older. It mentioned Arthur's wife. Her name was Clara Bell. She had died inside the house in 1987. The article described her death as sudden and unexpected. But one detail caught our attention. Arthur had reportedly told people that Clara's voice continued coming through the telephone after she died. Police had dismissed his claims as grief. Emily looked at me. "Maybe that's what we're hearing." I shook my head. "Maybe." Then she looked at the date. Her expression changed. "John." "What?" "This article is dated October 14th. The exact same date Arthur had disappeared." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. That evening we returned home. We moved the wardrobe away from the bedroom wall. Behind it was a thin wooden panel. It looked much older than the surrounding wall. There was a small metal handle. I pulled it. The panel opened. A narrow passage disappeared into darkness. Cold air flowed out. Emily whispered, "Close it." Instead, I turned on my phone flashlight. We stepped inside. The passage was barely wide enough for one person. Dust covered the floor. Old wires hung from the walls. At the end was a small room. It looked like a forgotten telephone exchange. Dozens of wires ran across the walls. And in the center of the room sat an old black telephone. It had no visible cable. No power. Nothing connected to it. Yet the moment I entered the room, it rang. Ring. Emily screamed. I nearly dropped my phone. The telephone rang again. Ring. I slowly approached it. "Don't touch it," Emily whispered. I picked up the receiver. A woman's voice spoke immediately. "John." I couldn't breathe. "Who are you?" The voice whispered. "Emily." I looked at my girlfriend. She had gone completely pale. The woman continued. "She isn't Emily." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the receiver. Emily stared at me. "What did she say?" I told her. Emily shook her head. Then she whispered. That was my voice. I frowned. "What?" The woman on the telephone. She looked terrified. She sounded exactly like me. We ran from the room. I closed the panel. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. That night Emily wanted to leave. I agreed. We packed a few things and went downstairs. At 2:45 a.m. we stood beside the front door. We waited. 2:55. 3:00. 3:04. Then the clock changed. 3:05. My phone rang. I answered. My own voice whispered from the other end. "John." I couldn't move. "Don't leave." The call ended. Emily looked at me. "What did you hear?" I told her. She grabbed my hand. "We're leaving now." We opened the front door. Fog covered the road. A tall man stood in the distance. He wore an old-fashioned coat. His face was impossible to see. He raised one hand and pointed toward our house. Then he disappeared into the fog. We ran to the car. I turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Then I noticed the dashboard clock. It read 3:05 a.m. My phone said 3:17. The car clock was frozen. The radio suddenly turned on. Static filled the vehicle. Then a voice whispered through the speakers. "John." I turned it off. The radio turned itself back on. "John." Then another voice joined it. Emily's voice. "Don't trust him." I looked at Emily. She hadn't spoken. The radio continued. "Don't trust Emily." Emily whispered. "John, please." The radio went silent. Then the engine started by itself. The headlights switched on. The doors locked. We were trapped. The radio displayed a strange frequency. 305. Then an old recording began playing. A man's voice. "Arthur. If you're hearing this, the house has chosen you." Emily looked at me. Arthur continued. "The calls begin at 3:05. They continue until someone answers the final call." The recording crackled. Then came the sentence that changed everything. "Do not answer the final call." The recording ended. I looked at the clock. It said 3:18. Then suddenly, 3:05. The entire car went dark. My phone began ringing. The screen displayed one word. Home. I didn't answer. It rang again. I still didn't answer. Then Emily's phone began ringing. She looked at the screen. My name appeared. John. Don't answer it. She hesitated. The call stopped. Then both our phones rang simultaneously. Neither of us answered. A few seconds later, the car doors unlocked. We jumped out and ran. We didn't stop until we reached a petrol station. The attendant stared at us as we tried to explain what had happened. Then he asked one question. You're staying in the Bell house? I nodded. His face changed. That house has been empty for 23 years. I stared at him. No, we rented it. He shook his head. The house you're talking about was demolished in 2003. My heart seemed to stop. That's impossible. He pointed toward the road. There hasn't been a house there since the fire. I looked at Emily. She was crying. What fire? I asked. The attendant answered quietly. The fire that killed Arthur Bell. Emily grabbed my hand. Then she whispered, John. What? We never moved into a house. I looked at her. What are you talking about? She stared through the window toward the fog. We moved into a memory. And somewhere behind us my phone began ringing again. 5 a.m. Even though it was daylight. Part 2: The House Between Calls. I answered the phone. Arthur's voice whispered, Now you understand. My hands were shaking. Where are we? His answer was barely audible. Inside the call. What does that mean? You have one chance. One chance for what? Wake up. The line went dead. I looked at Emily. What did he say? She stared at me. Then she repeated the words. Wake up. Everything around us began changing. The petrol station lights flickered. The walls seemed to stretch. The road outside became impossibly long. Fog swallowed the surrounding buildings. Then a telephone began ringing. Not my phone. Not Emily's. The sound came from everywhere. Ring. 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 I closed my eyes. John. Emily screamed. I opened them. We were back in our bedroom. I immediately sat up. Emily was beside me. The room looked normal. The curtains. The furniture. The bedside table. Everything was exactly where it should have been. I looked at my phone. 4 a.m. 1 minute before the call. What happened? Emily asked. I don't know. Then the clock changed. 3:05. My phone rang. Emily grabbed my wrist. Don't answer. I didn't. The ringing stopped. For several seconds nothing happened. Then a message appeared. You have 1 minute. Another message followed. Look under the bed. I stared at the screen. John. Emily whispered. I know. I slowly climbed out of bed. I knelt down. Then I looked underneath. There was an old photograph. I pulled it out. It showed Arthur Bell standing beside a woman, Clara, and behind them stood a young girl. The girl looked exactly like Emily. I dropped the photograph. Emily picked it up. Her hands were trembling. "That's not me." I looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I've never seen this photograph." But something about the girl bothered me. The resemblance wasn't close. It was exact. Same eyes. Same face. Same expression. Emily suddenly whispered, "John." "What?" "I've never told you this." "Told me what?" She looked at the photograph. "When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me stories about Clara." I waited. She said Clara had a daughter. My stomach tightened. What was her name? Emily looked at me. "Emily." The room became silent. I shook my head. "That's impossible." "I know. You were born decades after Clara died." "I know." "Then why does that girl look exactly like you?" Emily didn't answer. The phone rang again. 305. This time I answered. A woman's voice spoke. "John." "Who are you?" "I am the reason she came here." I looked at Emily. "Who?" "Emily." Emily stepped backward. "John, don't listen." The woman's voice continued. "She isn't your girlfriend." My heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" "Ask her where she was born." I turned toward Emily. "Where were you born?" She didn't answer. "Emily." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know." The call ended. Neither of us moved. Then the bedroom door opened by itself. Nobody stood outside. A cold breeze passed through the room. From the hallway came a whisper. "John." It was Emily's voice. But Emily was standing right beside me. Another whisper. "John." Then another. "John." I grabbed Emily's hand. We ran downstairs. Except the downstairs wasn't there anymore. The house had changed. Every doorway led to the same bedroom. We opened one door. Bedroom. Another. Bedroom. Another. Bedroom. We tried to find the front door. There was nothing. The hallway seemed endless. Finally, Emily screamed. "Stop." She pointed toward the wall. Someone had scratched words into the paint. 305. Underneath. The call must end. And below that. Someone has to answer. I stared at the words. Then I understood. The calls weren't simply trying to frighten us. They were leading us towards something. But who was supposed to answer? My phone rang. 305. I looked at Emily. "Don't answer." She nodded. The ringing continued. Then her phone began ringing. The screen displayed MOM. Emily froze. My mother died when I was 6. The phone kept ringing. She slowly raised it. I grabbed her wrist. Don't! Her eyes filled with tears. The phone stopped. A voice came from behind us. Thank you. We turned. A man stood in the hallway. Arthur Bell. He looked old. Exhausted. Almost transparent beneath the weak hallway light. But there was nothing monstrous about him. He simply looked like a man who had been trapped somewhere for far too long. You finally came, he said. I stared at him. What is this place? The house between calls. What happened to you? Arthur looked toward the bedroom. I answered. Answered what? The first call. He explained that decades earlier he had discovered an old telephone line beneath the house. The line wasn't connected to the public telephone network. It shouldn't have worked. But every night at 3:05 the telephone rang. The first time Arthur answered he heard Clara's voice. His dead wife. She asked him to come home. Arthur followed the voice. And after that he couldn't leave. Why are we here, I asked. Arthur looked at Emily. Because Clara needs someone to replace her. Emily stepped backward. What? She has been waiting for someone who looks like her. Why me? Arthur's expression became sad. Because you're connected to her. Emily stared at him. Arthur continued. Clara was part of your family. She was your ancestor. Emily shook her head. That doesn't explain why she sounds like me. Some things don't belong to ordinary explanations. The house suddenly trembled. A low vibration moved through the walls. Arthur looked at his watch. You have to leave before 3:06. I looked at my phone. 3:05. Arthur pointed toward the hidden telephone room. The phone. We ran. The passage appeared behind the bedroom wall. We entered the room. The black telephone was ringing. I picked up the receiver. A woman's voice whispered. John. I swallowed. Clara. Silence. Then. Do you remember me? No. A soft laugh came through the receiver. Everyone forgets. I looked toward Arthur. Arthur remembers you. The line went silent. Then Clara spoke. He always did. Arthur stepped forward. He picked up another receiver. I hadn't noticed it before. Clara. Her voice changed. Arthur. He closed his eyes. I waited 23 years. I know. Why did you keep them here? I was lonely. Arthur looked at Emily. Let them go. The telephone began screaming with static. The entire room shook. Arthur shouted. Now. I grabbed Emily by the hand. We ran toward the doorway. Behind us the telephone continued ringing. Then the world went black.